All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into those crazy UFO sightings off the Oregon coast you've probably heard about.
Oh, yeah, those have been all over the news lately.
Exactly. And forget the grainy photos and the wild theories. We're going straight to the source, the actual air traffic control audio from December 2024.
Wow, so we get to hear how this all unfolded in real time.
You got it. Think multiple pilots reporting seriously strange lights, all captured live. It's like we're right there in the control tower with them.
That's awesome. I've been wanting to hear these recordings.
Well, buckle up because it's a wild ride. Let's start with that very first report, shall we?
Yeah, let's hear it.
It comes from a MedEvac flight call sign, MedEvac 661 Fox. They were flying west of Eugene, and the pilot starts describing these lights that are going up and down. He even calls the whole thing pretty crazy.
Pretty crazy, huh? I wonder what he saw.
Well, he later mentions a circle, like a corkscrew pattern. So definitely not your average airplane lights.
No kidding.
Aha.
That's wild. And how did the air traffic controller react?
At first, it's almost comical. You can hear the skepticism in their voice, like they're thinking, okay, pilot, maybe you need another cup of coffee.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can imagine. But then things get real when more reports start coming in.
Right. It's like a chain reaction. Suddenly you have pilots at different altitudes, different locations, all reporting these strange lights. And the descriptions start to vary a bit, too. It's like a puzzle with pieces that don't quite fit.
So it's not just one pilot seeing things. It's multiple trained professionals all reporting similar phenomena.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to one area, either. We're talking Eugene, Newport, Florence. It seems like these things are all over the Oregon coast.
That is definitely strange. And what about the air traffic controllers? How do they handle all of this?
You can practically hear the shift in their tone. It goes from skepticism to genuine concern. They realize this isn't just some isolated incident, and they're scrambling to make sense of all these conflicting reports.
I bet it must have been chaos in that control tower.
You said it. And what's even more striking is how quickly safety becomes a major concern.
Safety.
Yeah.
Of course, with all those pilots reporting strange objects in the airspace.
Exactly. It goes from, what are you seeing, to, you need to maneuver to avoid this.
Wow. That's when you know things are getting serious.
Right, and you can hear it in their voices. There's one moment where a controller tells a pilot, "You are cleared to maneuver as necessary left or right to avoid the UFO out there."
I can't even imagine being that pilot. You're trained to deal with all sorts of situations in the air, but this
This is something else entirely.
absolutely definitely sends chills down your spine.
So we've established that multiple pilots are seeing something unusual and that air traffic control is taking it seriously. But the question remains, what exactly are they seeing?
Yeah, what are these UFOs?
Well, thankfully, the reports start getting more detailed as things progress. We start hearing descriptions like red and circular, moving very fast, almost zipping back and forth.
Okay, so we're getting a clearer picture of what these things look like, at least to the pilots.
And then here's where things get even more interesting.
Oh, what happens?
One pilot actually tries to capture video footage with his phone.
What? He's trying to film a UFO with his phone? That's amazing.
I know, right? He even gives his number to the air traffic controller, hoping they can somehow get a visual record of what he's seeing.
Talk about a wild day at the office.
Yeah.
One minute you're dealing with routine flight paths. The next, you're taking down a pilot's phone number in hopes of documenting a UFO.
Haha, exactly. But now we gotta address the elephant in the room, radar. You'd think something moving this fast, this erratically, would light up radar screens, right?
Yeah, you'd think so.
But throughout these recordings, the controllers repeatedly state that they have no radar contact with these objects.
Really? Nothing at all. That's really strange.
At one point, a controller even says, "We don't have anything on our radar, not even a little primary target for it."
Okay, so for those of us who aren't radar experts, what exactly does that mean?
Good question. Basically, a primary target in the context of radar refers to the direct reflection of the radar signal bouncing off an object. It's the most basic way these systems detect things.
So no primary target means the radar isn't picking up any direct reflections from these objects.
That's right. And that's pretty significant, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It raises so many questions about what these objects could be. How can something be visually observed by multiple pilots but remain invisible to radar?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, are they somehow evading radar detection? Are we dealing with something beyond our current understanding of technology?
It's a puzzle with some very intriguing pieces for sure. But it's not just the pilots and the air traffic controllers who get involved in this whole thing.
Wait, there's more.
Oh yeah, the Coast Guard gets pulled into this too, which adds another layer of official involvement to the story.
So the air traffic controller contacts a Coast Guard helicopter call sign, CG6063, and asks them to keep an eye out for anything unusual.
Okay, that makes sense. You've got all these pilots describing weird lights, no radar contact, so why not get another set of eyes, maybe with different equipment involved?
Exactly. But here's where things take another unexpected turn.
Another one. Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat.
The Coast Guard initially reports seeing nothing out of the ordinary. Then they mention seeing a shooting star earlier in the evening.
Huh. So you've got these pilots reporting these crazy things, and the Coast Guard, who should be in a prime position to see them, sees nothing.
It's a real head-scratcher. And it raises the question, were the pilots mistaken? Were they really seeing what they thought they were seeing?
Well, not necessarily. The Coast Guard may have just been looking in the wrong direction at the wrong time, or maybe their equipment wasn't sensitive enough to pick up on what the pilots were observing.
Okay, so the Coast Guard's lack of confirmation doesn't rule out the existence of these objects. It just adds another layer of complexity to the mystery.
It's a reminder that perspective is everything,
Yeah.
and that just because one person doesn't see something doesn't mean it wasn't there.
All right, so let's take a step back and process this. We have these reports from multiple pilots, consistent descriptions, bizarre movements, no radar contact, and now a Coast Guard report that doesn't quite add up. This is getting pretty wild. Where do we go from here?
It's definitely a puzzle with a lot of missing pieces. Let's see if we can shed some light on this mystery after a quick break.
Sounds good. We'll be right back with more of our deep dive into the Oregon UFO sightings.
So where do we go from here with this? I mean, this is pretty crazy stuff. Multiple pilots, no radar contact.
It really is. It makes you wonder if we're dealing with something truly out of this world, or if there's a simpler explanation that we're just not seeing.
Right, like is it aliens or is there something else going on?
Exactly. So let's put on our detective hats and consider some possibilities. What are some of the less extraordinary explanations we could explore?
Okay, well, the first thing that pops into my mind is misidentified aircraft. Could these pilots have simply mistaken something familiar for something strange?
Yeah, like maybe another plane or a drone.
It's definitely possible, but remember, these are highly trained professionals used to identifying all sorts of aircraft. And they were pretty adamant that what they were seeing was unlike anything they'd encountered before.
That's a good point. Plus, there's the whole issue of no radar contact. If it were a normal plane, wouldn't it have shown up?
In most cases, yes.
Yeah.
But there are some scenarios where that might not be the case. Think about stealth technology, for example.
So are you saying that if these were some kind of advanced stealth aircraft, they could basically fly under the radar?
Exactly. And we know that governments around the world are constantly developing more sophisticated stealth tech. It's not completely out of the question that we could be seeing something like that here.
Okay, so stealth technology is a possibility. What about experimental aircraft? Could this have been some kind of top secret prototype being tested?
It's another avenue worth exploring. I mean, if a government or private organization were testing a new type of aircraft with unique capabilities, it's conceivable that it could create those visual effects the pilots described.
And maybe they were deliberately trying to avoid detection, hence the lack of radar contact?
Right. It would make sense from a secrecy standpoint.
Yeah.
But then why test it over such a populated area? That seems kind of risky.
Yeah, true. It does raise some questions. Well, moving on from experimental aircraft, is there anything else conventional we should consider?
What about weather? Could some unusual atmospheric conditions have created visual effects that the pilots misinterpreted?
Interesting thought, but the descriptions we hear in the recordings, red and circular zipping back and forth, they don't really sound like typical weather phenomena.
Yeah, you're right. Plus, we have multiple pilots at different altitudes and locations, all describing similar things. It's hard to imagine a weather anomaly that could account for all of that.
Okay, so we can probably rule out weather. So what are we left with?
Well, this is where things get a little more speculative. But I think it's important to consider all the possibilities, no matter how far-fetched they might seem. So what about the possibility of extraterrestrial origin?
Whoa, okay, you're going there. Alien spacecraft. Could these be visitors from another planet?
Hey, it's a valid question. We've got high speeds, unusual maneuverability, and no radar contact. If we're talking about technology far beyond our own, it's not impossible that these objects could defy our understanding of physics.
It's definitely a mind-blowing thought. But if that's the case, why would alien spacecraft be hanging out off the coast of Oregon? What would be their purpose?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe they're just observing us, studying our planet. Or maybe their intentions are something we can't even comprehend.
It's both exciting and a little bit scary to think about.
I know, right? It really makes you question our place in the universe.
All right, let's come back down to Earth for a minute. We've talked about aliens, but what about something a little more grounded, like advanced drones?
Ah, yes, drones. That's a good one. What if some organization, maybe a government agency, is testing out super advanced unmanned aerial vehicles?
I see where you're going with this. So the lack of radar contact could be explained by sophisticated stealth technology, and the unusual movements could be due to some kind of propulsion system we don't understand yet.
Precisely. It fits the observed data and it doesn't require us to rewrite the laws of physics.
But it does raise some concerns about transparency. If these were government drones, what are they doing flying around civilian aircraft? And why the secrecy?
It definitely raises some ethical and political questions, but without more information, it's hard to speculate on their motivations.
Okay, so we've got a few possibilities on the table. Misidentified aircraft weather phenomena, extraterrestrial origin, and advanced drones. Anything else we should consider?
Well, there's one more angle that's worth mentioning, and that's the possibility of misperception or human error.
Hold on, you're not saying that the pilots were lying or making this up, are you?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But even the most experienced pilots are still human. And human perception, especially in stressful or unusual situations, can be unreliable.
So you're saying things like fatigue, low light conditions, or even just the stress of the situation could have affected how the pilots interpreted what they were seeing.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to make sense of the world around us, and sometimes in ambiguous situations, they can fill in the gaps with assumptions or expectations. What might have started as a few flickering lights could have become something more defined, more structured, more extraordinary in the minds of the pilots.
That's an interesting point. It reminds us that even experts can be fooled by their own perceptions.
Exactly. We have to remember that eyewitness accounts, no matter how credible the source, should always be taken with a grain of salt.
It makes you wonder how much of what we perceive as reality is actually shaped by our own brains.
It's a humbling thought for sure. But even if we factor in the possibility of misperception, it doesn't completely explain everything. We still have the multiple pilots, the consistent descriptions, the lack of radar contact. There are still some pieces missing from the puzzle.
So even with all these potential explanations, we're still left with a lot of unanswered questions.
That's the nature of mysteries, isn't it? We can speculate, analyze, and explore all the possibilities, but ultimately we may never know for sure what those pilots saw off the coast of Oregon.
But that's part of what makes it so fascinating, right? The mystery, the unknown, the challenge to our understanding of the world.
Absolutely. It's those moments when we're confronted with the limits of our knowledge that we're pushed to think differently, to consider new possibilities, to expand our understanding of what's possible.
So even if we never get a definitive answer about what those pilots saw, the very act of investigating, of exploring these different ideas is valuable in itself.
I completely agree. It's the journey, not necessarily the destination, that's most rewarding.
Okay, I love that. But I have one more question for you before we move on. If you were leading this investigation, what would be your next steps? What would you do to try and unravel this mystery?
That's a great question. Well, first things first, I'd gather as much data as I could. We have the air traffic control recordings, which are a goldmine, but I'd want to dig deeper.
So what kind of data are we talking about?
I'd start with the pilots themselves. I'd want to do in-depth interviews with each of them, really getting into the nitty-gritty of their experience. What did they see? How big were these objects? What shape were they? What color? Did they notice any specific patterns in their movements?
So going beyond those initial reports in the ATC audio.
Right. Those recordings give us a good starting point. But there's so much more we could learn from the pilots' first-hand accounts. Plus, I'd want to check if any of them managed to capture any photos or videos, even if they're blurry.
Right, because even a blurry image could give us some clues about the shape or features of these objects.
Exactly. And then there's the radar data. Even though the initial report said there was no contact, I wouldn't just take that at face value. I'd consult with radar experts, analyze the raw data from different systems, see if there's anything that might have been overlooked or misinterpreted.
So maybe there's a faint signal or a blip that was dismissed as noise that could actually be related to these UFOs.
It's a possibility. And even if we don't find any direct evidence from the radar, just analyzing the data could help us understand the limitations of our current systems and where we can improve.
It's like we're surrounded by data all the time, but are we always interpreting it correctly?
That's a great point. It's not just about collecting data. It's about knowing what to look for, how to analyze it, and how to connect the dots. Sometimes it's about challenging our own assumptions about what we think we know.
Okay, so beyond the pilots and the radar data, what else would you look into?
Well, I'd also want to explore any potential environmental factors. Were there any unusual weather patterns at the time? Were there any reports of meteor showers or other astronomical events that could explain what the pilots saw? Any seismic activity that could have created weird atmospheric effects?
So leaving no stone unturned.
Exactly. You never know where that crucial piece of information might be hiding.
This is making me think of those detective shows where they start by ruling out the obvious, and then they slowly expand their investigation, following every lead until they figure out what happened.
Uh-huh. I love that analogy. It's a process of elimination following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it takes you down some unexpected paths.
Okay, so let's say you've gathered all this data, pilot interviews, radar analysis, environmental reports. What's the next step? How do you start making sense of it all?
Well, that's where the real detective work comes in. It's all about looking for patterns, connections, anything that stands out or deviates from what we normally expect. It's about comparing the different accounts, looking for things that line up and things that don't.
So it's like creating a timeline of events, mapping out the sightings, the movements, the radar data, and seeing if any clear picture emerges.
Right. And as you start to piece it all together, you can start testing different hypotheses.
Yeah.
Does the evidence support the idea of misidentified aircraft? Does it point to some kind of weather phenomenon? Or does it suggest something more extraordinary?
And if none of those conventional explanations fit, then what? Do you start looking at the fringe theories, the aliens, the secret projects?
That's tough. I think it's important to stay open-minded, but also to be grounded in the evidence. We have to remember that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
So you'd be looking for that smoking gun, that one piece of data that proves beyond a doubt that something truly strange is happening.
Exactly. But even if we never find that smoking gun, the process of investigation itself is still incredibly valuable. It forces us to question our assumptions, to learn new things, and to grapple with the limits of what we know.
And sometimes the biggest discoveries are the ones we make about ourselves, about our own capacity for wonder and our willingness to face the unknown.
That's beautifully said.
Yeah.
It really captures the essence of why we're so fascinated by mysteries like this. They tap into our primal curiosity, our need to understand the world around us, even if it means questioning everything we thought we knew. Okay, so let's say we've done all that. We've talked to the pilots, we've analyzed the radar data, we've checked the weather, and even looked into any astronomical events. What's next? Where do we go from here?
Well, now it's time to put all those pieces together and see if we can make sense of this puzzle.
Right, it's like having a giant jigsaw puzzle with all these different pieces scattered around.
Exactly. And you have to start by examining each piece carefully, looking for patterns and connections, anything that stands out.
Like maybe two pilots describe the object as being red and circular, or maybe several sightings happened around the same time of day.
Exactly. Those are the kind of details we're looking for. Then we can start comparing the different pilot accounts, see if there are any consistent themes or any major discrepancies.
Like maybe one pilot says the object moved erratically, while another says it moved smoothly.
Right. And then we layer in the radar data, the weather reports, the astronomical data, and see how it all fits together.
We're looking for those moments of corroboration where different pieces of evidence support each other, or maybe contradict each other.
Like if a pilot describes seeing a bright light and then we find out there was a meteor shower that night.
Exactly. That's when you start to get a clearer picture of what might have happened.
But what if we go through all of that and none of the conventional explanations seem to fit?
That's when things get really interesting. That's when we have to start considering the more unconventional possibilities.
You're talking about aliens and secret government projects, right?
Well, I wouldn't jump to those conclusions right away, but I think it's important to keep an open mind and consider all the possibilities.
Okay, so we're not ruling anything out, but at the same time, we need to be careful not to get carried away with speculation.
Exactly. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if we're going to start talking about alien spacecraft or top secret government technology, we need to have some pretty strong evidence to back it up.
So what kind of evidence would convince you that something truly extraordinary is going on?
Well, I'd say we'd need something tangible, something physical that could be analyzed and verified.
Like a piece of debris from one of these objects.
Exactly. Or maybe a clear, high-resolution photo or video that shows details we can't explain with our current understanding of technology.
Or maybe some kind of measurable effect on the environment.
Right, something that defies the laws of physics as we know them.
Those would definitely be some compelling pieces of evidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even if we never find the smoking gun, the process of investigation itself is still incredibly valuable. It forces us to question our assumptions, to expand our knowledge, to confront the limits of what we know.
And sometimes those are the most important discoveries of all, the ones we make about ourselves and our place in the universe.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the evidence, considered the possibilities, and even delved into some of the philosophical implications of these events.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. And even though we may never know for sure what those pilots saw off the coast of Oregon, I think we've all learned something from this deep dive.
I think so too.
We've learned about the limits of our perception, the importance of critical thinking, and the vastness of the unknown.
And we've been reminded that the search for truth is a never-ending journey.
Well said. So until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and keep those questions coming.